Hi everyone, it's good to have you here. In today's video, I want to talk about something that many parents, especially as they get older, quietly struggle with. What to do when your children stop showing you the respect you once had. Maybe they don't listen the way they used to. Maybe they talk over you, ignore your advice, or make you feel like your voice doesn't matter anymore. It hurts, and it's hard to know how to respond. I've seen this happen to people I care about, and maybe it's happening to you too. But instead of reacting with anger or trying to force respect, there are other ways, calmer, more powerful ways, that can shift the relationship and help you regain the respect you deserve. In this video, I'm going to share 5 things you can start doing today if your children no longer treat you the way they should. These aren't tricks or quick fixes. They're real changes in how you carry yourself that can make a real difference. Let's get into it. One of the hardest things to come to terms with as a parent, especially later in life, is realizing that the more you try to win your children's approval, the less they seem to respect you. It feels backwards. You think, if I just do a little more, they'll appreciate me. If I stay agreeable, avoid conflict, help them out whenever they ask, they'll see how much I care. But often, the opposite happens. The more you give in, the more you go along with what they want, the more invisible you start to feel. And it's not because they don't love you, it's not because they're trying to hurt you, but somewhere along the way they stop seeing you as a parent with your own identity and start seeing you as someone who will always adjust, always agree, always say yes. That's a dangerous place to end up, because the truth is, respect doesn't come from sacrifice. It comes from self-respect. I've watched friends, clients, even people in my own family fall into this pattern. They used to be so strong, full of conviction, but little by little, they gave up pieces of themselves just to keep their children happy. And it's heartbreaking, because when you do that, you're not just losing their respect, you're slowly losing yourself too. So what do? You start by stopping. You stop chasing their approval. You stop trying to be the version of yourself that you think they'll like the most. Instead, you reclaim your voice. You say no when you mean no. You speak up when something doesn't sit right. You hold your ground, not with anger, but with calm confidence. Not to push them away, but to remind them that your needs matter too. At first, they may resist. They may not understand why you're changing. But give it time. When your children see that you respect yourself, they begin to see you in a different light. They may not say it out loud, but internally something shifts. They start to see your boundaries as strength, not rejection. And that's the first real step in earning back their respect, not because you demanded it, but because you modeled it. And which brings us to the next point. Once you've stopped chasing their approval, you'll find yourself at a crossroads. How do you respond when disrespect still shows up? Do you push back? Do you fight for your voice? Or is there another way? One that doesn't require confrontation, but quietly changes the dynamic. Let's talk about that next. When your children talk over you, dismiss your opinions, or treat you like your thoughts no longer carry weight, it's natural to want to push back. You might feel the urge to raise your voice, to remind them of everything you've done, to say, "Don't forget who raised you," and it's not coming from a place of ego, it's coming from hurt. From the feeling of being erased in a relationship that used to feel secure. But here's the thing, arguing almost never works. It might feel like the right thing in the moment, to defend yourself, to make your case, but more often than not, it just adds more tension, and in that moment, when voices are raised and emotions take over, the message gets lost. You're not seen as strong, you're seen as reactive. And that doesn't lead to respect, that leads to distance. Like what I've learned and what I've seen in people who've been through this is that the most powerful response to disrespect is not confrontation, it's composure. It's showing your children through your actions that you are grounded, calm, and sure of who you are. That you don't need to argue to be heard, you don't need to shout to be taken seriously. When you carry yourself with quiet strength, you send a clear message. I know my value, I know who I am, and I won't let anyone, even you, take that away. I remember someone telling me once, "My father never raised his voice, but when he looked at you, you straightened up." That's the kind of presence we're talking about. Not intimidating, not cold, but firm, respectful, centered. When you respond to disrespect not with anger, but with unwavering calm, it changes the energy. It makes people pause. And in that pause, something shifts. This doesn't mean you let things slide or pretend everything's fine. It means you lead by example. You model the kind of behavior you want to see. You treat yourself with dignity, you speak with clarity, and you walk away from conversations that cross the line. Over time, this does something subtle but powerful. It redefines the way your children see you, not as someone demanding respect, but as someone who naturally commands it. And once you've learned to respond with that kind of presence, there's another layer to explore. How much of your emotional well-being is still tied to their approval, their attention, or their affection? That question can be tough to face, but it's an important one. Let's talk about that next. As parents, it's natural to want connection with our children. You love them deeply. You've invested years, decades into raising them, worrying about them, being there whenever they needed you. So when they pull away, when they grow distant or stop showing affection, it feels personal. It feels like something's missing. And for many, that gap becomes painful. You wait by the phone. You wonder why they don't visit as often. You start to feel like maybe you're no longer a priority. But here's something that can be hard to admit. When your emotional well-being depends on your children, on their attention, their validation, their closeness, you hand over a kind of power they were never meant to hold. And not only does that make you feel small, it also places pressure on them that often pushes them further away. I've seen this happen again and again. A parent feels lonely, so they reach out constantly. They remind their children how much they miss them. They drop hints, they ask why the calls are less frequent, all with the hope that it will draw them closer, but instead it does the opposite. The child begins to feel guilty, then frustrated, and eventually they create even more distance to protect themselves from the emotional weight. I'm not saying the desire for closeness is wrong, it's human. But there's a difference between love and emotional dependence. When your children sense that your happiness depends entirely on them, the relationship becomes uneven. And respect doesn't grow in that kind of space. So what can you do instead? You begin to reclaim your own space. You turn inward and ask yourself, what brings me joy? Outside of them, you start filling your own cup again through friendships, hobbies, learning, movement, quiet moments that belong just to you. Not to prove anything, not to be distant, but to become whole again on your own terms. And something almost always shifts when that happens. When your children see that you're emotionally grounded, that your happiness is not something they have to manage or carry, they start to feel safer around you. They come back, not because you called, but because your energy invites them in, not pulls at them. And in that space of emotional independence, something else becomes possible. The ability to draw healthy lines, to decide calmly and confidently what kind of behavior you're willing to accept and what you're not. And that's where we'll go next. Let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. When was the last time you clearly told your children, "This is not okay with me"? Not in anger, not in the heat of the moment, but calmly, with clarity. If you're like many parents I've spoken to, it's probably been a long time. Maybe you've let things slide, comments that stung, dismissive tones, being treated like an afterthought because you didn't want to rock the boat and you didn't want to seem dramatic or cause distance. So you stayed quiet. But here's the truth. Silence doesn't keep the peace. It just makes the imbalance deeper. If your children are treating you in ways that leave you feeling hurt, invisible, or disrespected, I want you to hear this. People, even those who love you, will treat you the way you allow them to, and that doesn't make them bad, it just makes them human. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about showing others how to be in relationship with you, and when you don't set them, you unintentionally teach others that your needs don't matter. Now that can be a tough shift, especially if you're not used to asserting yourself. But boundaries don't have to be loud. You don't have to make dramatic statements or give ultimatums. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "I'd like to finish my thought before you speak," or "I'm not comfortable being spoken to like that," or even, "If we can't have a respectful conversation, I'm going to take a break." It's not about controlling them, it's about protecting your dignity. I know this might feel uncomfortable, especially if your role in the family has always been to smooth things over or make everyone else feel okay. But your peace matters too, and the more you respect your own limits, the more others will start to respect them too. And I'd love to know, have you ever tried setting a boundary with your child? How did it go? Or if you haven't, what's held you back? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone, and I know others in this community learn from them too. Because here's the thing, when you start setting boundaries, you'll likely be met with some resistance. That's normal. But with consistency and self-respect, those boundaries create space for real change. And once you've done that, it opens the door to something just as important, rethinking how much of yourself you continue to give, especially when it's not being appreciated. Let's talk about that next. If you've ever found yourself exhausted, not physically but emotionally, from constantly showing up, helping, giving, doing, it might be time to take a closer look at the pattern, not just what your children are doing, but what you've been doing too. This is something a lot of parents don't realize until they're already deep in it. You give because you love, you give because you feel responsible, you give because for years, that's what parenting required. But somewhere along the way, your children stopped being children, and you, maybe without meaning to, kept giving like they still were. What happens then? You keep showing up with help they didn't ask for. You offer support even when it's not returned. You say yes even when something inside you says you're tired. And the hardest part is, when that giving becomes expected, you don't just feel unappreciated, you start feeling invisible. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something. Is there a part of you that equates giving with being needed, and being needed with being loved? That's a tender question, I know. But if the answer is yes, it's not a flaw, it's a signal. A signal that maybe it's time to stop giving from habit and start giving with intention. That means asking yourself, is this something I want to do, or something I feel obligated to do? Is my help truly helpful, or is it enabling a lack of respect or responsibility? Pulling back doesn't mean you love them any less. It just means you're ready to rebalance the relationship. It means you recognize that love isn't about overextending yourself. It's about connection, mutual care, and shared respect. When you start giving from a place of choice, not guilt or expectation, the dynamic shifts. Your children may not understand it at first, but in time they'll feel the difference. And they'll begin to see your support as something meaningful again, not just automatic. And if this part of the conversation speaks to you, I'd really like to hear about it. Have you caught yourself giving more than feels fair? What changed when you stopped? Or what's holding you back? Leave a comment if you feel comfortable, because your story might be the one someone else needed to hear. Next, let's talk about what life looks like when you're no longer centered entirely around your children. Because as strange as it may sound, that might be the key to getting the respect you've been missing. There's something many parents don't realize until much later in life. When you make your children the center of your world for too long, they start to believe that's where you belong, and they stop seeing you as someone with a full, meaningful life of your own. It doesn't start with bad intentions. Most of us pour everything into our kids when they're young. We give up sleep, hobbies, friendships, sometimes even our own dreams, just to make sure they're okay. And for a while, that's what parenting demands. But what happens when they grow up, and your world is still built around theirs? You begin to wait. For the phone call, for the visit, for the moment they remember you used to be someone more than just mom or dad. And when that moment doesn't come, it's easy to feel forgotten. But the truth is, sometimes they can't see you because you've stopped showing up in your own life. This might be the hardest shift of all, because it means asking yourself, Who am I now outside of being their parent? What do I care about when I'm not focused on them? What brings me alive? And if those questions feel unfamiliar, that's okay. You're not too late. It's not over. In fact, this might be the most powerful chapter of your life if you allow yourself to step into it. Start small. Join something local. Take a class just because it interests you. Reconnect with old friends. Volunteer. Travel. Read. Paint. Walk. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be yours, because the more full your life becomes, the more your children begin to see you differently. They start to notice your confidence, your joy, your independence, not as something that takes away from them, but as something they can admire. I've seen it happen. A parent who used to feel forgotten starts building their own life again, and suddenly, the calls come more often, the visits feel warmer, the tone shifts, not because they asked for more, but because they showed what self-respect looks like. So I want to ask you, when was the last time you did something just for you? Not for the house, not for the family, for you. And what might it look like to begin again? Let me know in the comments if you're thinking about this part of your journey, or if you've already started building a life outside of your children. What's changed for you? I know your story will inspire someone else. And if you're still unsure where to begin, just remember this. You don't have to wait for permission to take up space in your own life. You've earned it. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you. I know this isn't an easy topic. It's personal. It touches on wounds that many parents carry quietly. And if you're here, it probably means you felt that shift, that moment when the relationship with your children no longer feels quite balanced, when the respect you once had seems to have faded, and you're not sure how or if you'll get it back. I want you to know you're not alone in this. I've had these conversations with so many parents, strong, loving, selfless people who feel confused, hurt, and even a little lost when the dynamics begin to change. And what I've learned over and over is that respect isn't something you can demand with words. It's something you create. Quietly, steadily, by the way you live, the way you carry yourself, and the way you take up space in your own life. So if your children aren't treating you with the care or consideration you deserve, don't start by confronting them. Start by coming back to yourself. Stop chasing their approval. Lead with calm, not conflict. Let go of needing their attention to feel whole. Set boundaries that honor your voice. Give only when it feels right, not just because you always have. And above all, rebuild a life outside of them. A life that reflects who you are, not just who you've been to others. You're still allowed to matter. Your joy still counts. And the more you remember that, the more your children will too. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear what stood out the most, or where you might begin making changes. Leave a comment if you feel ready, and if you're just quietly taking it in, that's okay too. Either way, I hope this gave you something meaningful to carry with you. Until next time, take care of yourself. You're worth it.